Here's my title: When Will Engineering Reality Enter the UK Energy Policy Debate? And it's just here. So I want to do three things this afternoon, and because I'm starting just as I should be finishing, I intend to gloss over a few slides, and in one or two places, where's the pointer? Right. I want to pick out a couple of things on what are otherwise dense slides, but just draw your attention to them. Ian Fells is a colleague in the Academy based up north, and I want to use a couple of things from his report. And also I was on a study group at the Royal Academy of Engineering, where we did a study of looking out to 2050. Let me just say that, so I think I had another slide there with all the, yes, well here's some of the sources, this is what I want. And this will be available for you to pick up any of the slides later on. The situation today is, if you look at the winter of 2007-8, we had generating capacity of 75 gigawatts, operating capacity at 65, and peak operating capacity, and then demand capacity at 60. Winter time it was this. I haven't got the data for this yet because it's not due out till next month, but we had an exceptionally cold winter, so I shall be interested to see what the number is to compare with that. The situation today also is that we have a number of power plants that have been down and offline for various stages, and this is completely characteristic of an aging fleet. And there are planned decommissioning of the nuclear plants as we have, so that by 2023 only size will be left. That's some further data there. It's also the case because of the EU Large Combustion Plant Directive that we'll have to close down quite a lot of our coal and oil facilities, so that in total about 30% of our capacity will be needed to be replaced by 2020, or 30 to 35 gigawatts by 2027. And at the moment, renewables only produce 5% of the capacity, well below the target, and this will not replace baseload. Tidal, I think, is one exception to that. Now, I want to just show you a couple of quotes from various parts of government documents. This is one from DTI in 2007. It says, well, it's just what I've said there. The energy demand will continue to grow over time despite increased energy efficiency as the economy expands. There's, from another report, shows the unserved demand profile over the next 2 years. So this is what we have to sort out. But then there's a report just a few months ago of Treasury, and it says the government is confident that the current arrangements will continue to deliver secure supplies of energy over the next decade. And what are they? Significant new investment is planned in onshore and offshore wind generation, gas generation, that will be enough to replace the closing plants. And the current investment is about 10 gigawatts of new gas and renewable generation under construction, further 11 is necessary planning consents, and so on and so forth. There seems to be a disconnect between those two, and this is what it looks like pictorially. You see, what you have down here is the existing supply. You have here the arrangements of things that are under construction, things that are consented but not under construction, and then these are the things that we're going to need. And I was at a meeting just earlier this week with the deputy head of Sandia Labs, who himself is a nuclear engineer, and I said to him, if you've got all the permissions in place and the finance in place tomorrow, when would the nuclear power plant that you build start making significant contribution to the grid? And he said between 5 and 10 years. And I said, you know, could you comment on 5 and 10 years? And he said, well, it depends on all sorts of other things, but not less than 10. And of course, what we don't have is some of the consenting that's required. Now, the Renewable Energy Foundation has a few things, and in principle, there was one particular one, here's this one, and other than at modest levels, wind power causes and compounds greater gas dependency than alleviating it. This is the point that our current offshore is working at about 36% efficiency, and every time the wind goes down, we need something in reserve. And so here's the point of concern. There's several other things in there which are really quite revealing as well. And here's the point here. From 2010 to 15 onwards, the UK will support a high probability of insufficient firm capacity or very expensive gas, at best resulting in price shocks and in all probability blackouts, both scheduled and unpredicted. In either case, there will be gravely weakened economic socially. So this is the view of the economics Renewable Energy Foundation. And here's one which you might find interesting. This is Cambridge University on the home front. This is our consumption here, going up like this, and there's going to be another big jump up here soon as the Sainsbury plant laboratory. Among much of this increase here, this is growing like China, and it's representative of the success of this university, and large chunks of it are a plug load. It's not the buildings themselves, but it's what's going on in clean rooms, in plant breeding rooms, and in animal laboratories. They are just large consumers. And there are various schemes of different degrees of fiction and unreality associated with the various targets that are being set to do something about it. Here's the US energy perspective. World energy use is projected to grow by 49% between 2010 and 2005, and all the other data there, which is there for you to read. Here is what it looks like at the current trend, world market energy from nuclear, renewables, natural gas, coal, and so on. And then also split, as you see here, between the world energy-related supplies, between the OECD, non-OECD, and the totals. And you see what's happening is the non-OECD is doubling over this period. Just as a fact that I got from one source here, the actual increase in the use of coal by China and India every year is twice the UK national consumption of coal. So that if we got out of coal totally, it would be made up by China and India in 6 months. Here's the picture which I found rather helpful, because here's wind down here, but this is a sort of scale of things. And coal is actually undergoing a resurgence at the moment. There is more coal being used. The UK national targets, I want to show you something here which I found fascinating. We're going to put up 3,000 windmills according to DECA in the North Sea. And at one point they were going up every 22 days. And I got this data from David Mackay, and frankly, I'm still bemused by it, because here is the number of offshore windmills going up at roughly 100 a year. This is till the end of May this year, and the claim is that 450 are going up. And so instead of going up from 10 per year, we're going to 1,000 per year. And frankly, I don't know where they got that data from, because I'm not aware of the commitment of 10-fold increase in the capacity. So I'm challenging that one. I want to know where it's coming from. But that's the data I got from DEC only a week ago. Now, the other thing that's important about all of this are timescales. If you look at demand reduction, these are plots of where we've got to in terms of the penetration into the sectors of various measures. For example, nearly all hot water tanks are now insulated. Loft insulation of any kind, and then loft insulation, I think, cavity wall insulation, and so on. And we've got to the stage now where large parts of these low-hanging fruit have actually been captured. I think I want to go back, sorry, let me just go back to point out this slide here. If you look at the housing sector, which I've been particularly involved with when I was giving advice here, the total CO2 emissions fell by a net 4% during 1990 to 2005. This was in spite of a 12% increase in the number of homes and the rise in home electronics and other things that you use electricity for. And the reason that happened was precisely because of all of these interventions here. And we got a 4% net drop. But the target for 2020 is another 20% decrease. So I keep asking myself, and indeed all the civil servants, where's the evidence of the multiplied by 5 effort? And in fact, the only success I've seen, if you take the last year's recession and you look at the drop and just compound it for the next 8 years, we'll get there. But that is not a solution I would like to. So there are two summary points. I believe that security of supply must and will take precedence when all the chips are down over everything else, including climate change and the Climate Change Committee and so on. And at the moment, our imports of gas and oil are increasing just as instabilities in Russia and the Middle East are becoming more apparent. And the UK heads towards losing 30% of its own capacity over the next 10 years. Now, in all of this, nuclear power is the known in Rumsfeld's terminology. You know, compared with renewables, we do actually know the upsides and we know the downsides. And I always told people that if I was ever giving advice to a minister, I'd say it's nuclear first, nuclear second, and nuclear third. Now, here Ian Fells is a person who's made a career out of studying the energy supply. And here is his concerns about meeting the short-term measures for increasing the capacity over this next decade. And that is, first of all, to extend the life of all the nuclear power plants due to come offline between 2010 and 2025. Extend the lives of all the coal-fired power stations due to retire. So this has just got to go. And there are a number of quick builds that should be done. And in fact, I'm ashamed to say that the Royal Society actually did put in a submission to the King's North Inquiry saying that no new coal power station should be built until CCS is installed. Well, that is still an experimental technology, and the idea that we're going to wait and freeze is not likely to happen. Then increase various interconnectivities, and then increase the use of waste from electricity. He had a number of other things where in fact he concentrated on demand reduction and retrofit. Now, those are the things I want to, and I want to just finish with a series of points from a study of the Royal Academy of Engineering. I want to tell you why we did it, because as it says at the bottom, it's not optimal engineering practice, and I'll admit that for the start. But the Royal Commission on Environmental Pollution in 2000 produced a report which came up with the original 60% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions to the country by 2050. And they did that on the basis of why 2050? They went around the sector and was told that there was no chance of a significant contribution from nuclear fusion by that period. There will not be the equivalent of the hydrogen cell available, so that we're going to have to get to 2050 by that stage. And then they went on and produced their report from that. Now, they also had a number of scenarios about how you might get to that target, and I'm going to come back to it in a minute, because what we did was to actually re-look at those and see what would it look like in the case of an 80% reduction in carbon dioxide by 2050, which is what is enshrined in the climate change bill. And we started with demand reduction. We made a certain assumption about the capability to reduce demand, and I'll come back to that. It's one of the scenario parameters. And then we made one very high-level assumption about the nature of the energy supply between now and then we produced the mix. Now, this is not optimal engineering, because in engineering you start from here and you move forward. This is actually taking the end and willing it and looking at the consequences. So the process was to set up in each category the demand relative to current level, choose the primary sources of energy, balance supply and demand by adjusting the levels of supply, calculate the carbon emissions, and repeat these until we've got them. The four scenarios are here. Level demand. That is, we assume that from now on out we don't produce any more energy, we live within that, and that fossil fuels was prioritised for transport. We then had a medium level demand, which I'll come back to what that means in a minute, but the fossil fuel was prioritised for low grade heat, which is a large part of what we use, particularly in buildings. The third scenario was the same medium reduction with the fossil fuel prioritised for transport, and then the fourth one was a high fuel reduction with fossil fuel required for transport. And so here is what I mean by level demand, no change in these things from now through to 2050, capped at current levels. This is medium reduction, 40% reduction in the demand on low-grade heat by whatever measures, and a 20% reduction in the use of energy for electrical appliances, high-grade heat and transport, and then the high demand reduction with these more challenging targets. Now, when you finish this and you churn out the sums, these are the numbers. So this is the sort of gigawatt hours average being used. This is today, 200 to 2007, of which most of our energy comes from fossil fuels, a little bit of our nuclear, and so on. And this is what the figures look like under those four scenarios when you go out to 2050. And here is the net carbon CO2 reduction. So we've got what we needed in round terms. Now we'll have a look at what it means. This is what the point is I can spend a lot of time on this, but I'm just going to pick out a couple of things because depending on your favourite, you could follow these through. This is what today's energy supply looks like in terms of fossil fuel, nuclear, intermittent renewables and biomass. And these are the supply. They go into the grid, and here is how they're used in demand. So that's what it looks like today. And so what we're going to now do is look at the equivalent diagram for the four coming out. So here's the level demand in 2050. So what you see if you go backwards is that the fossil fuel has shrunk to almost very small, but it's made up of nuclear, intermittent renewables and biomass. Then you find that the grid, go backwards. The grid, which only handles about 42 gigawatts there by now, is having to handle about 3 times as much. And you can see that according to your particular wishes, there's what you've got for low-grade heat, high-grade heat, that's essentially industrial processes, electrical appliances and transport. And you can do the same for the second scenario, which is a medium reduction, but where transport is electrified. And so what you find is that a lot of this comes down into this route. The third one is this medium reduction where you've electrified low-grade heat. And so a lot of that's been electrified, but the source of that comes in from intermittent renewables, nuclear and biomass, and the fossil fuel is being reserved for transport in that case. And then the last one, which is the big reduction, all the lines get a lot thinner now because we're just, and you find here the fossil fuels, the nuclear intermittent, and then these distributions in the grid you see only has to be half as big in these compared with the others. Now, we got quite a lot of criticism for this, but the point was we made a certain series of assumptions, and this is what follows. And the 4 main messages that came out of it, which is that there's no single silver bullet that's going to achieve the required cuts in emissions. Demand reduction across all sectors will be quite essential. The full suite of low-carbon energy supply technologies will be needed in some mix or other. And the scale of the engineering challenge is massive, and in fact unprecedented in pre-peacetime. I will come back to that one in a minute. And so here's the concluding sentence, that the experience of engineers shows that implementing fundamental changes to a system as large and complex as the UK's energy systems to meet the 2050 greenhouse gas targets will bring about many challenges for government, business and industry, engineering and the public alike. Turning theoretical emissions reduction targets into reality will require more than political will. It'll be short of nothing less than the largest peacetime thing seen in history. Now, what I quite liked about this was that on the blogosphere, somebody wrote, I was almost tempted to believe that this paper was actually subversive, an attempt to highlight just how bizarre, unaffordable, indeed unachievable as the raft of actions would be, need to be introduced to achieve this completely nonsensical emissions reduction. But I fear it isn't the case. Perhaps some of the authors, all allegedly eminent, maybe more homeopath and surgeon end of the engineering profession with titles like this. And so on. But we don't need to be wide-eyed green if you smoke too much weed when we were younger. But they don't get it. So that's the way it's been received. And I just want to show you here, one of the ways, I also want to show you here what's happening among just the fossil fuels for a moment. That, in fact, coal is actually going up at the moment, and it's meeting almost entirely a reduction of what we're getting in the use of oil. So that at the moment, what's happening within fossil fuels is that every time the amount of oil goes down, the coal is going up. So I'm going to leave you with that as a fairly bleak picture, but I do it for certain reasons. I managed to get a letter in the Times the other day because Chris Huhne is advising the European Union to increase its targets to 2020 from not 20% reduction to 30% reduction. And I think it's frankly hypocritical and dishonest to do that when we know we can only get that in this country if we're going to prepare to tolerate large-scale brownouts. And my continuing problem that I had when I was giving advice is that much of the advice is given by scientists who know as opposed to engineers who do. And in 2018 or 19, when the proverbial hits the fan, it will be none of these scientists who call to account before parliamentary inquiries. It will be the engineers who have not stood up at this point and protested that what we need is engineering reality. By all means, let's take a view that was around just before the Second World War, where the threat could be seen and everything was turned up, but not to will the end without willing the means, because I think it's hypocritical and doomed to failure. And it will do worse. I think it's going to produce an enormous backlash on science, and I'm seeing it in several areas where the gap between what is practically realisable. If everybody wants to meet the target and we're going to mobilise ourselves and bankrupt ourselves like the last time we mobilised, that's fine. But if we're not prepared to do that, we will not meet the targets, and therefore we should not be fooling anybody about it. Let's try everything we can as fast as we can, which is why I'm pleased to listen to the talks today, because they're absolutely correct. The question we should have now is not willing the ends, but drawing out a trajectory which we could conceive of practically and putting that in the public domain. Thank you.